All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Chewing the Cud. This is a weekly live stream where we sit down on Sunday evenings at the kitchen table and discuss things related and unrelated to regenerative agriculture. We usually start off with some brief introductions for those who don't know who we are and what we're all about. And then we'll move into the topic for the week. This week's topic is fencing philosophy. So just sort of the overview about all, your permanent, your interior fences, your temporary wires, like all that kind of stuff, sort of the philosophy behind how we use them and things to think about. And we can get into nitty gritty about that kind of stuff, about specifics of like tips and tricks and techniques and gear and that kind of stuff if you guys want to do that. And then we'll open it up to a question answer, ask us anything type deal, which is the part that we really enjoy. So yeah, I guess we'll start with some introductions for those who are, if this is your first live stream.
Yeah, so welcome.
Or if you're watching on YouTube.
So. Welcome, my name is Isaac Tappenden. I'm an intern here. Ben Hawley is the other intern. We are interning under Greg Judy, who is him and his wife own Green Pastures Farm. We run around 370 head of South Pole cattle, roughly 160 St. Croix sired hair sheep. We sell guardian dogs, bale and rollers. We give farm tours. We host grazing schools. And Ben and I are here just to learn the ropes and gain valuable experience for our future endeavors. So with that,
absolutely,
that kind of wraps it up as far as what we're doing here.
Yep. Okay, so we'll get into the topic for today, which is fence. And I guess like the most logical place in my mind to start with is perimeter fencing and permanent perimeter fence, which is a must-have. Like last week we talked about water, and that's sort of the order you want to be looking at things. Like obviously you need perimeter fence to keep your animals in your farm and not roaming all over creation. That's super important. It also makes you sleep better at night knowing that your animals are going to be in regardless if they bust down an interior wire or they get into trouble or whatever. They're going to stay on the farm, and that's super critical. But once you figure out your water situation, really the next thing you got to lay out is your fencing diagram, if you will, for your property. And so for perimeter fence, it serves two functions really. Like the primary function obviously is keeping your animals in, and then in our sort of line of work, I guess we use the perimeter fence as a way to transfer, or I guess transmit electricity across the farm to make to be able to make our interior wires hot, or pretty much anything we want to electrify. We can use the perimeter fence as the hookup for all of the interior stuff, and then all the stuff coming off of the interior stuff. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, that's really what you're using your perimeter for. And I mean, we're huge proponents of high tensile electrified perimeter fences. That's our go-to.
180,000 psi's, 12.5 gauge.
12.5 gauge. And there's I mean, if we want to get into specifics,
yeah,
there's like several companies that you'd want to buy it from. You wouldn't necessarily want to go to your local farm and home store and pick up some high tensile wire, because it in all likelihood it'll be complete junk. That's something that Greg has stressed to us. So I think like brands are like, True Test, what is it, Powerflex maybe. I can grab my computer, I have the whole spreadsheet.
Was it? Yeah.
But yeah, let me do that. Why don't you talk about something related to
interior fences or perimeter fence. So yeah, obviously with the perimeter fence, really the object is to keep the animals in. You can go the route of barbed wire or woven wire as more of a physical fence. That's not the direction Greg's chosen to go for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah,
we use the electric fence is a psychological barrier as opposed to a physical barrier.
Yep.
And so if you can get inside that animal's mind, you have a lot more control than just using posts and wire to rely on keeping them in as far as like physically.
Yeah. So back to the high tensile. The high tensile. So it's like True Test, Gallagher, Powerflex, and Ken Cove are all brands that you would trust as being a high quality, high tensile wire. And that stuff it lasts forever. Like the good quality stuff doesn't rust or corrode, and it'll last for, Greg's got stuff up that's like 20 years old. And there's no signs of corrosion on it for the most part. The only spots where sometimes we get on like perimeter stuff where sometimes we'll get problems is if you have like a gate hookup or something like that, and it'll eventually like burn a hole in the wire if it keeps shorting
and stuff.
But that takes a while for that to happen. The other huge advantage of using high tensile as a perimeter as opposed to barbed wire or woven wire is when you have a giant tree that falls on your fence. Literally all you have to do is just walk over to it, obviously turn the power off on your fence, walk over to it, cut off the section of tree or branch or whatever that's on your fence, and the fence will just spring right back into place. As long as the wires haven't been kinked and snapped, they don't break. The
wires are really flexible.
It's
and part of that's because of the posts that we use too.
Yeah, so we can also talk about that.
Yeah, so Greg's a huge proponent of non-conductive posts, whether that be fiberglass, timeless fence makes a really good line post.
Yep.
Those are the two big ones.
Fiberglass and timeless.
People have used like.
You can always use wood.
You can use wood with insulators.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to stay away from steel posts with insulators, just because if you think about it, you've got 200 ground rods sitting there with your wire attached to it.
Yep.
So it's just a problem waiting to happen.
A deer walks into it, and then all of a sudden your fence is shorting out like crazy, and you have no power, and then your cattle get out, and it's just an absolute nightmare. Even if you have wood with insulators on it, like if something knocks that off, the wood is nowhere near as conductive as a steel post, and so it's not going to completely ground your fence out. It'll short out a little bit, but it's not something where it's going to be like arcing like crazy and just bringing your power down to 0.
2,000 volts or whatever.
So the combination of either the fiberglass or the timeless posts, as well as the high tensile wire, makes an extremely durable fence. If anything falls in it or runs into it or whatever, it's really difficult to break. The only time when the high tensile stuff breaks is if you're like setting it up or you have it loose and you get a kink in it and then you pull it tight, it can break that way. But as long as you don't have a kink in your wire, it's just incredibly strong. 180,000 PSI.
By kink, he means say you're pulling a wire and you go loose and it backwards coils up.
Yep.
If that makes sense. So it goes like this and then it hooks like that. Then it's gonna kink when you pull it tight, and so that's when it's going to break.
Like when if you're using your garden hose and you're trying to wash something, and then all of a sudden there's no water coming out of the hose, and you look back and there's a big kink in it. It's the exact same deal, except what happens when you get it like that and you pull it is it'll snap. Which is also a little trick if you don't have a pair of pliers.
Yep.
And you need to cut a piece of high tensile wire. If you
bend it one way and then bend it back the other way, it's gonna snap.
Yeah, so you intentionally will kink it, and you can just bend it, and then sometimes you have to do it maybe another time, and it'll just snap right off. Which is pretty cool because it's so tough that if you use a normal pair of pliers to try to cut it, like wire cutters, you'll put a big gouge in your wire cutters if you start cutting any sort of volume of high tensile wire with just normal cutters. We use Nipex. We love Nipex insulated wire cutters, pliers.
I think it's a German company. Or German, maybe not. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, but the insulated pliers are super helpful because in a pinch, if you need to cut something, you don't have to run all the way back to a switch or find a way to turn the fence off. You can just grab a piece of wire or cut it or something and not have to worry about getting shocked. But the steel
Sometimes
in there,
this doesn't work.
if there's a hole in the handle,
if there's any kind of moisture and there's a little crack in the handle, it'll get you, and that's from past experience.
But the steel is like hardened. It's like hardened
steel.
Hardened steel like cutters, and so it won't put a big gouge in your cutting surface from having like cutting the high tensile wire. It's that strong, and that's the reason why we use 12.5 gauge as opposed to like 9 gauge. Is because 9 gauge is just crazy thick in comparison.
And you can't hardly do anything with it. Like, it's hard to work with.
Yeah.
Like, if you're trying to put crimps in or you're trying to do a hangman's knot, it's just so tough to work with.
Because there's like no bend in it at all.
But if you go any less than, or less as in higher.
So like higher gauge is thinner wire.
Like 18 gauge is like piano wire.
Yeah, you don't want to go thinner than that because then it's just brittle.
Thinner than 12.5.
Yeah, thinner than 12.5, so higher than 12.5 gauge. That's sort of the sweet spot. The Goldilocks fence is 12.5 gauge from Greg's experience. We've got a perimeter fence on one of the farms that's 9 gauge.
And it's a good fence. And it's strong, but it's just hard to work.
Crazy conductive.
It's just hard to work. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot more conductive.
Yeah.
You got to think about it like this. It's the same way with water. Greg was describing it. It's like the bigger the pipe or flow, like the 9 gauge is bigger, it can push more, so it's like more juice that you get from it, and so
but 12.5 gauge is the way to go. So that's sort of like perimeter fence. It's pretty simple. Like, there's not a lot to it. There's a lot of technique involved in like making it easy on yourself when you're setting it up, and that's kind of hard to describe without actively being able to see it. So we're not going to get into that. But the sort of the second piece, once you have your perimeter set up, is once you have your perimeter set up, the next piece to the puzzle is to understand where and when you should be putting interior permanent fencing. So that'd be like paddock divisions or around ponds or like exclusion areas or like things like that. It would be useful to put in permanent. But the overall philosophy that Greg has, and we agree with it 100% from working in this sort of using this stuff all the time, is that if you have like a new area that you're going to, whether it's a new lease, a new piece of property or whatever, I would highly suggest to invest in more temporary, like as in step-in posts and poly braid and stuff like that, so you can do everything in temporary in the beginning and then understand what your traffic patterns are like, what wires you're constantly putting up over and over and over again, regardless of how you're fencing it. And it just gives you a much better idea of like, this is where I need an interior wire. This is where I don't need to put an interior wire, because sometimes we don't like to make the paddock that size. The more flexibility you can give yourself on the interior of your farm, it's just gonna be way more effective grazing system if you can do that. So that's something definitely to keep in mind.
The worst thing is a poorly put fence. Like, if you have a fence in the wrong place, it becomes a huge burden to like your grazing plan.
Yep, and it's effort to put it up, and it's effort to take it out. And so if you can just wait, if you've got enough temporary stuff, and just operate with almost all temporary, and then once you've gone through it a couple times and you sort of understand how you want to graze the piece of land, because you can have an idea of how you want to do something, and then it doesn't really click until you get animals on there and you see how they're moving around, and like they're going to show you things that you didn't really think about, like areas where like, man, I got to keep them out of that, or I really need to sort of fence it so it's not pinched over here. I need to get like a wider area over here so that they can get more grazing in that spot. Like if you got, all sorts of permanent interior fencing all over the place, you just made yourself a lot of extra work. So keep it as simple and open as you can on the inside. And obviously starting out. Obviously there's things that you can tell right off the bat are going to be problematic and you need to fence off permanently. Like, I don't know, if you want to keep them out of a pond and you've got a tire tank below it, that's always a good situation.
You've got a wood section that you don't want cattle getting into, or you've got
an exclusion zone like above a pond. But sometimes those are a little bit hard to see unless the cattle are in there. If you've got water lines, especially surface water, like
hoses.
like serve, like, you know, if you have a HDP line above ground, it's always a good idea to like run a permanent wire over the top of that so the cattle aren't actually gonna step on it. If it's under the ground, then obviously you don't have to worry about it. It gives you a lot more flexibility. But yeah, just try to keep it as simple as you can in the beginning, and then add in layers as you go on to make it efficient. And I mean, the less fence you have to put up, like the more cost effective it's going to be. You know what I mean? You don't have to spend all that money on posts and material and labor and like all that kind of stuff, and maintenance as well. You know, like there is maintenance involved with the fence. It's not like you just set it up and leave it, because it's electrified.
And a big amount of the maintenance is making sure you don't have a lot of brush pressure or like brush clearing.
Yeah.
And the fence will do a lot of that for you, as far as like if you leave the fence on.
That's an important point, actually.
Yeah. So Greg, and all the farms, all the chargers are left on 24/7, 365.
Yep.
And what that does, especially in the growing season, is it's constantly sending that pulse through the wire. So any kind of little grass blade or little tree branch or something that's growing up and touching that wire, it's getting shocked and shocked again, and it's going through the sap and it's killing that sap flow. So it's sent, like, over time it keeps the brush and the grass and the vegetative load off the fence. Whereas if you turn your fencers off, you know, when you leave the farm with the cattle and you come back, do your rotation, you get back around, that fence line has had whatever 60 days to grow up on your fence, and then the amount of vegetative load you'll have on the fence at that time, it'll just suck all your voltage out of the fence, and you'll have animals getting out because your fences are cold. So just keep them on and just keep that flow going, that charge running through, and keeping the brush off, and that does a lot of the vegetative load. Keeps that down.
And something also important to point out for people who aren't familiar with fence is like the fact that you're leaving it on. You're like, oh, you're gonna be wasting so much electricity. It's like it does not actually how it works. It's almost like a battery that's not hooked up to anything when the fence is on. It's like one side of a battery, and then the other side of the battery is the ground, and like. The only time when there's flow of electricity really is when they're connected, i.e. when something's actively getting shocked, or you have a ground, like a really serious ground. It's funneling flow or like amps out of the fence and like into the ground, which is then going to tick over your meter and cost you money as far as electricity. But if you have a cleared fence and it's on, there should, in theory, there would be zero. There'd be zero turnover on your electric meter if there's zero load.
If you have just the fence charger not hooked up to the fence, just plugged into the wall running, there's not gonna be any electricity that it uses. Yeah,
exactly. So you're not wasting money by having it on, or wasting electricity by having it on. It's like holding a bucket of water above your head, as my brother would describe, and that water is up there, like ready to be poured, but nothing's actually pouring out of the bucket until you tip it. And like when you tip it, that's like when something's getting shocked or there's a big ground or something, and then you're actually flowing electricity out of your bucket, and that's what costs you money. But just holding the bucket in the air doesn't cost you any water or any money. But the thing to also make a distinction is also the fact that, like, even if you keep your fences on all the time, you're still periodically going to have to clear brush around them, because eventually, at least in this part of the country, this part of the world, I mean, there's just crazy vegetative growth during the growing season. And so even though the fence is helping out a lot, if it's on all the time, you will get enough load on there where it's going to start pulling it down. And so periodically, every couple of years or whatever, you need to go in there. And if you can keep up on it, like, regularly, it's a lot less work.
But if you have like a lot less fence, it's a lot less work.
Exactly. If you have a lot less fence, it's a lot less work. But if it's something that you can just sort of periodically try to like cycle through and be like, all right, we're going to clear this fence row like this season, or this fence row the next season or whatever, you can sort of cycle around your farm like that and keep everything sort of at bay as far as clearing. It's going to help you so much, as opposed to building up and building up and building up, and then it's this massive project to have to clear a fence out. So that's something else to think about with perimeter. So I guess to recap, you got your perimeter that we were just talking about. Your interior, don't put it up unless you absolutely are certain that you need it. And then the last piece to the puzzle is what we would call temporary fence. And when we say temporary fence, we're talking about step-in posts, polybraid reels, pigtail posts, and like, you know, insulated handles.
Yeah.
And with those couple pieces of gear, it is crazy.
We
the
can
configurations.
make any configuration.
Anything you want, we can do it.
Anything you need the cattle to do, we can do it with the temporary fence.
Like
I have that much confidence in it. Just takes it's like our brains.
Yeah.
Like if our brains can do it, we can do it with the fence.
It's like, and it's just experience and practice and understanding how to use all of the pieces to make angles and curves and circle around things and do like one-sided U's and like weird gate handles,
little catch pens, and
making lanes to catch pens. Yeah, it's a pretty, if your cattle are broke to it and you have the equipment for it, like it is an incredibly powerful tool. It's crazy. It just gives you so much confidence.
We built a lane the other day.
Yeah.
We're trying to skip them up to so on the Judy farm, there's a mile-long stretch that's pretty narrow. So what we're trying to do is skip them up through that to the northernest part of the farm, graze that off, and then graze our way back until spring. And so we had to make a long cattle drive. We stopped at the beginning of the Judy farm. Then we made a cattle drive to the middle, and then this morning we made a cattle drive to the top part.
Yep.
And so in order to make that lane, we were sitting there thinking, how are we going to do this? We got to do double lane all the way to this paddock, and that's going to eat up a lot of posts and reels. And then we're like, there's a perimeter fence right there. Why don't we first we were like, we can just scoot go for it, go about 500
yards or
whatever, and then scoot over to the fence, and then use the fence as one side of the lane, and just do one side temporary all the way to the paddock. And like, we're sitting there thinking like, why don't we just do it all the way from this paddock? Because the fence comes all the way to here. Yeah. So we're like, well, that's a lot easier. And so we just had to make one single side of the lane.
That then turned into the paddock wall itself, and like skirted around a pond and then hooked onto a fence. It was the longest stretch of fence I think we've ever made.
If we had a map, it would be cool to show.
Yeah, it was like I don't know. It was probably 2/3 of a mile.
Yeah, we started on one side.
To 2/3 of a mile long fence.
I'm gonna draw it because it's kind of cool.
But anyway, it was just very cool to be able to see. It's something that it's a piece of fence that we never put up like traditionally, and so just like understanding we have the capability of doing this. Like there's no permanent paddocks in the way of us doing this or anything. It's just that flexibility of having it all open allows you to do things like this where you can make long lanes where like normally there would be paddocks or normally you would graze, and it just makes it a lot easier. And it doesn't take that long to set it up and put it back and set it up and take it down. And that has to do with the setup of the four-wheeler and the way that we like run fence, which we can get into if people are interested, but it's a little bit tricky to describe without actually seeing the four-wheeler in person. But what do you got?
All right, so what we got is I'm not gonna be able to see it very well. Let's see. So this is the north place. I'll have to look at it to the shadow. So the cattle were right in here. I don't know if that's right there, right in here. And what we did to make the lane is we hooked on cold here and ran it to this wire, and then followed this wire all the way up. That's like at least a half mile, would you say?
Yeah, probably half a mile.
Close to a half mile. Then we curved it back, skirted around this pond, gave them a drinking spot, and then hooked it onto the fence. So then this was their paddock, and when we moved them in there, this morning we just put a wire right here, keeping them in this paddock. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
To see what we got. Oh, my phone's kind of acting up.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and then as far as materials are concerned, the stuff that we recommend, which we've expressed multiple times on here, and we'll keep reiterating it because it's definitely it's proven at this point, is your step-ins. O'Brien step-ins are the best step-ins made. We prefer like blue is a really good color because white doesn't show up very well in the wintertime. Yellow is a good color.
One of the better ones.
We don't have a lot of yellow ones, but yellow would be a great color because it would show up in the winter and in the summer. The blue sometimes gets hidden by the grass a little bit, but it's not too bad. And then you've got your Tarragate reels, which are a 3-to-1 geared reel.
Red would be a good color, probably. Of course, red
if
you're
red-green colorblind, then it's a problem.
Greg wouldn't be
able to see his posts.
He's kind of
colorblind a little bit. Anyway,
yeah, he'll always say the red gate, and it's a green gate.
It's a green
gate, and it's a red gate.
Yeah.
Go up to the green gate.
Yeah, and so then Tarragate reels. It's a 3-to-1 geared reel. The gears are really well made, so they don't fall apart. That's the biggest thing that happens with a lot of geared reels is just by using them and them being outside, like that gear box on the inside would just fall apart, and then the reel's trashed at that point. Like you can't even use it. People will use like the stuff as simple as like extension cord reels. You know, like you can just buy them at like a hardware store, Home Depot or whatever. But you just hand wind it.
1-to-1 gear ratio.
That's a 1-to-1 gear ratio. And those work if you're only setting up short stretches of fence, like a couple hundred feet. But if you're setting up a half a mile of fence like we just did with that reel, it would be an absolute nightmare. I don't think you could do it. It would take you so long that it just wouldn't even be practical. Because these geared reels can hold, well, the one that we have holds 1,320 feet per reel. You can get double-sized reels that hold even more.
That'd be heavy.
Because they're just wider. That would be like for some seriously big herds and big areas. Because what we'll do is we'll tie one reel onto another reel to make, so like we'll run one out completely, and then when that reel ends, we'll take that piece of poly braid and tie it to another piece of poly braid, and then run that reel and keep going. So we can just keep doing that as long as we need. And 3-4 reels in the extreme case, but sometimes you just tie 2 of them together and you're good to go. So
and then for those that like kind of understand what's going on, you're not gonna be able to make it tight from the one end. So what we do is on the way back to where we were going, we just every 200 yards we'd stop, or whenever it was like saggy,
it's loose.
We'll just go and just twist one of the temporary posts and then stick it back in the ground, and so that tightens it back up.
Yep. And then PowerFlex poly braid. I can tell you exactly what the specs are on that one. It's the, let's see, temporary fence. It's the Super 9 mixed tin copper stainless steel poly braid. It's a mixed metal. That stuff is, they make 2 different widths. There's like a thin width and like a slightly thicker width. It's the thin one, because the thick stuff sort of knots itself up a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the pigtail posts, those are pretty standard. It's just, a pigtail post. You just don't want the really tall ones.
PowerFlex makes the best pigtail because it's shorter, so it's got less of a cantilever action going on.
It doesn't pull itself out of the ground too much. And we only use those for corners or ending temporary posts. We don't use them as like line posts, which a lot of people do, because they're heavy and they don't stack. So when you're trying to pick them up, you can only carry it like a small handful of them at a time. Whereas like I could probably carry like 50 to 70 like timeless O'Brien step-ins, just because they're light and they stack really well on top of each other. They make your life a lot easier. And then we just use cold handles, because if we need a hot handle, a non-conductive handle, to like, it's just a little plastic handle with a hole on one end and a hook on the other, and it's made of plastic.
They come with the Tarragate reels.
Yeah. And it's non-conductive, but some people will use like those handles that have switches in them where you can make it cold or make it hot.
Well, there's a handle, I don't know who came out with it. It's white, and it's got, so on the one side where you tie on, you can either tie it on cold, tie it on hot.
Yeah.
You can either hook it on hot or hook it on cold, all in the same handle, just like the way it's designed.
But
our luck, we'd forget whether we made it cold there, hot there, or tied it on hot or tied it on cold, and we'd go to put it on, and we'd shock ourselves like so many times.
The other thithing too is like if we ever need to make a handle hot, we just give ourselves a couple extra inches of slack, and we'll just wrap the poly braid with the non-conductive handle. We'll just use that as an actual handle and just wrap that poly braid around the hot wire, and then it electrifies the fence. And so then when you need to take it off, you just unwrap it. So it just saves a lot of hassle of like remembering if you got it hooked onto what, and if you put a conductive handle on one end or a non-conductive one on the other. And so it just makes it simple. Reels are conductive, handles are not, and for the most part, and then you can switch them if you really need to. But
yep.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell. I think that sort of covers a lot of the basics. I know we probably confused a lot of people, and I know we probably helped a lot of people. So we'll just get into the questions and comments, and I'm sure there's going to be stuff about fencing and whatever else, but just start throwing stuff out there and we'll answer everybody.